now I'll hand over to Kathleen Florian to tell us about her role in this, as the Independent Assessor. Thanks, Kathleen.
Good morning, everyone. So the Office of the Independent Assessor was established in December of 2018, and whilst the Crime and Corruption Commission looks at the criminal side of things, as it were, the focus of the Office of the Independent Assessor is on disciplinary matters and on building capacity of councillors. So we see ourselves as, I suppose, what stands between councillors and the Crime and Corruption Commission. And if we do our job as best we can, then what we're doing is assisting councillors not to get to a point where they end up with matters before the Crime and Corruption Commission. And that's really about two things. That's about helping to build the capacity of councillors, and I'm going to talk more about that shortly, but also about dealing with disciplinary matters or misconduct matters, and dealing with those matters in a way which is independent of any local government politics, and which is consistent and appropriate, so that there is a sort of strong, consistent message about standards that are being followed up on a regular basis. And if we think that if we can do those two things well, working with local government, then the hope is that we will reduce the number of matters that are considered by the Crime and Corruption Commission. So I want to talk first about what is the conduct that exists within the local government area. So there are three categories of conduct that the OIA may have some engagement with. The first is inappropriate conduct. Inappropriate conduct is either a breach of a local government policy or a breach of the code of conduct. Misconduct is more the OIA's bread and butter, and while inappropriate conduct and misconduct are referred to the Office of the Independent Assessor for assessment, inappropriate conduct is referred back to local government for investigation, and misconduct is investigated by the Office of the Independent Assessor. If we've received matters that raise a reasonable suspicion of corrupt conduct, then we have a statutory obligation to refer those matters to the Crime and Corruption Commission, and on some occasions they may be referred back to us to undertake investigations. So they're the three categories of conduct that we most commonly see. Now, the Office of the Independent Assessor receives complaints, and we try and channel all complaints that we receive through our complaints form online. And the reason why we channel it through our complaints form is for two reasons. Firstly, it ensures that we identify complaints that aren't really appropriate for the Office of the Independent Assessor, that don't relate to our jurisdiction. So complaints about council employees that are outside our jurisdiction, about candidates, or about council decisions, because we look at councillor conduct, not councillor decisions. So we're seeking to identify those sorts of complaints that are really not relevant to us and to redirect them to the appropriate agency rather than them continue through the councillor complaints process. The next reason why we try and push things through our online form is that the form prompts people to provide the information that we really need to be able to assess matters quickly and robustly. So we will be seeking, we'll give you examples of complaints and the level of detail, which is good for us to be able to assess them properly. And we will also ask for prompts around whether there are any witnesses that are identified or documents that are relevant. Once we receive a complaint, we undertake to try and have that matter assessed, and that outcome communicated within 21 working days. And about 81% of our matters are assessed within that time frame. The inappropriate conduct matters tend to go over that time frame, and I'll speak in a little while why that's the case. In terms of the outcome of our assessment process, there are essentially 5 different outcomes that can flow from that assessment process. A matter could be referred to the CCC if it raises a reasonable suspicion of corrupt conduct. A matter may be investigated by the OIA if it raises a reasonable suspicion, I suppose, of misconduct. A matter may be referred to local government if it falls within the category potentially of inappropriate conduct. But for inappropriate conduct, there is a process under the Act where we will serve on or provide a councillor a Section 150 AA notice which sets out the allegation of inappropriate conduct and provide councillors with an opportunity to respond both to that allegation and to the issue about whether it should be referred back to local government for investigation. The practical effect of that is that it also often becomes a bit of a mini investigation in itself, and it allows us to identify matters where it's not appropriate to refer back to local government. But the process of going through that can take some time, and it tends to be those inappropriate conduct matters which exceed the 21 days. Alternatively, matters can either be dismissed under Section 150X or no further action taken under Section 150Y, and which we use depends really on who the source of the complaint is. Complaints from the members of the public are dismissed under Section 150X, and complaints from all other sources under Section 150Y. And the sorts of reasons why complaints may be dismissed or no further action taken is because it doesn't raise a reasonable suspicion of inappropriate conduct or misconduct, that it may be that it's lacking in substance, it may be that it's vexatious or not in good faith, it may be that it's not in the public interest or a justifiable use of resources. So that's the assessment process. So when the OIA receives a complaint, all complaints go through that assessment process. Now, I want to talk to you about vexatious, frivolous and not in good faith complaints, because I know that this is an issue of concern to many councillors. The OIA has a 3-step escalation process to deal with complainants and complaints that are frivolous, vexatious and otherwise improper. But it is recognised that there may be occasions where a complainant's behaviour is so serious that the OIA will move directly to step 3. Under the Local Government Act, and by virtue of that the City of Brisbane Act, the OIA can both dismiss a matter because it's vexatious or not in good faith, but in appropriate circumstances it can also charge a person with making a complaint that is vexatious or not in good faith. So to manage that process, we've put in place this 3-step escalation process, and the first step is if we receive a complaint that we believe is sort of borderline improper complaint, then we will dismiss the complaint as lacking in substance, but when we write back to the complainant, we'll say that we think this is a borderline vexatious complaint, and please be aware that we can dismiss complaints on that basis, and it's also an offence to make such a complaint. If that complainant continues to make a complaints which are vexatious or not in good faith, then the next step is that we will dismiss the complaint as vexatious or not in good faith, and that we will then warn that complainant that if they make another complaint that falls into the same category, then they will commit an offence, and we give them the details of that offence and the penalties that apply. To date, that escalation process has been successful in stopping all but one complainant at that point. There are, in all local government areas, motivated complainants, and I think it's important to make the point that we will not consider a complainant as vexatious if their complaint has substance. And so Motivated complainants, I know, are a challenge for all local government councillors, but I would encourage local government councillors to focus not on motivated complainants, but on your own conduct, because that is your best line of defence in dealing with motivated complainants, to ensure that in your conduct you don't expose yourself in any way. I want to talk now more about what exactly is misconduct. So misconduct can be a breach of the trust which is placed in a councillor. So what is a breach of trust? A breach of trust is where you link a breach to either a breach of the local government principles or to one of the local council responsibilities. So if there are 3 documents that I would recommend that each councillor keeps close by them, it is the Code of Conduct, it is the local government principles, which are duplicated in the Code of Conduct but are in Section 4 of both the City of Brisbane Act and the Local Government Act, and the councillor responsibilities, which are in Section 12 and 14 of each of those acts. And if there are times where during your career you've got difficult decisions before you and you're under pressure, have regard to those documents, because they're really going to be good documents to help keep you on track. The role of a local government councillor is really akin to a member of the board and a director on a board of directors, and it's a very strategic role. It's not an operational role. The role of local government councillors is to set the policy and to make the decisions that are made before councils. And there are 2 heads of potential misconduct, which really are about ensuring that local government councillors are focused on that more strategic and not operational role. And those are the misconduct provision, which makes it misconduct for a local government councillor to direct a local government employee or to make a request which is not consistent with the acceptable request guidelines of council. So all councils have to resolve to have acceptable request guidelines. So as new councillors, I'd encourage you to familiarise yourself with what is the acceptable and appropriate way to deal, as you must, with local government employees and undertaking the really important work that you do. The other categories of misconduct there relate to the misuse of council information or the publication of information which is confidential. I'd recommend to you in the LGAQ Councillor Handbook, in the schedule, there's an excellent list of matters which could be considered confidential to council. But as a rule of thumb, if you have information and it's not publicly known, then think carefully about whether that's information which you should share with the broader public on social media or through a media interview. But at the bottom of there's a series of conduct which are not classified as misconduct under the Local Government Act, but which are statutory offences. And these include failing to disclose a conflict of interest, failing to disclose a material personal interest, a councillor with one of those interests influencing or attempting to influence another councillor or a council employee, and not complying with the requirements around registers of interest. These are matters which can be dealt with as a statutory offence, but the approach of the OIA has been to deal with all of these matters as disciplinary matters in the first instance. And there are really 3 situations where we would look at dealing with these matters as a statutory offence. And they are where the conduct is so serious that it immediately escalates to that. And an example may be a failing to disclose a material personal interest in circumstances where you will receive a substantial benefit from the decision of council that you're participating in. We will also view a matter seriously if there is any sort of form of reprisal action taken either against another councillor or a local government employee. That's a really important aspect that we must enforce strongly. And the third situation is where we have tried to deal with matters on a disciplinary basis on a number of occasions, and our attempts to do that haven't been successful in getting the councillor to look at dealing with that matter in a different way. So in those circumstances, like the vexatious approach, that calls for an escalated response in that situation. So they're the main categories of misconduct, or the sorts of matters that we will deal with on a disciplinary basis. Now, the disciplinary approach is not intended to be punitive. A lot of the outcomes of disciplinary matters are about counselling, about training, about doing things which assist counsellors not to go down that path again. So although it can have a deterrent aspect, the idea of misconduct matters is to really get counsellors on the right track. If the OIA commences an investigation, we will send a letter of this type that provides you with two options. The letter will set out the full allegations, including all the particulars, and will give you an option of either identifying that the allegation is correct, in which case we can fast track that matter to the Councillor Conduct Tribunal as soon as possible, and we'll engage with you to come up with a agreed statement of facts to do that. If that happens, you can expect that the Councillor Conduct Tribunal will be taking into account your self-awareness and your cooperation in determining if and what sanctions should be applied. Alternatively, if you look at an allegation and you don't agree with it and it's not correct, then we'd ask you to let us know, and then we'll conduct a full investigation into that matter. After an investigation is conducted, all those same options on assessment continue to be available. So if it turns out to be more serious, it can be referred to the Crime and Corruption Commission. If it turns out to be less serious, it can be referred to local government or dismissed, or no further action taken. And that's a great outcome from an investigation as well, because if we make a decision to dismiss or to take no further action, then we provide really detailed reasons to both the complainants and to the counsellors, so that some of these things that can hang around for long periods of time can be put to bed. If, however, at the end of that investigation process there is a reasonable satisfaction that misconduct has occurred, then we will commence a natural justice process to ensure that a counsellor has all the information arising from the investigation and the opportunity to consider that and provide any other information or reasons why that matter should not be referred to the Councillor Conduct Tribunal, and a decision will not be made about whether that gets referred until those submissions are taken into account. We've announced an amnesty for all first-time councillors, so councillors who have no previous experience of local government, which will go up until the 5th of August, unless a matter is serious. And the idea of the amnesty is that it's about capacity building for first-time councillors while you get your feet under the table, and taking into account also the current COVID environment. Doesn't mean that we'll be ignoring complaints, however. We'll be communicating with those councillors to help them understand their legal obligations and the standards expected of elected representatives. So it's just a step to help build capacity, while you're sort of acclimatising to this new environment. This is a bit of a data dashboard about the work of the OIA since we've commenced on the 3rd of December 2018. Currently there are 211 active investigations. There are 30 matters that are currently with our legal team undergoing that natural justice process, 30 matters currently before the Councillor Conduct Tribunal, and 36 matters have gone through the other end, and 1,100 matters have been dismissed or no further action taken, either after assessment or after a full investigation of the matter. So as Alan said previously, that prevention is a really important aspect of what we do, and building a councillor's capacity to deal with the challenging circumstances of leadership in a local government environment and as elected representatives is critical. Previously, the Councillor Conduct Tribunal decisions have not been visible to councillors, and that's a really important aspect of getting that feedback loop to councillors about how the Councillor Conduct Tribunal is applying the standards so that councillors can see that and apply it to their own circumstances, and to assist with the decision making around conflicts of interest which occur at council. Because conflicts of interest are such a significant issue, we worked with the Integrity Commissioner earlier in the piece to develop a range of meeting aids and tools to assist councillors to not only understand when they have a material personal interest or a conflict of interest, but to assist councils to develop their capacity as a council to identify whether there is a conflict of interest, and if there is, how is the best way to manage that interest in the public interest so that that is all transparent and upfront and recorded on the record, so that people who are watching the live stream or in the back of the council room can see that as a local government you are really cognisant of your interests. They're out there, but you're dealing with them in the public interest, and that may mean that a councillor on occasion should be staying in the room, but if that's the case, then that needs to be recorded why that's occurring. Social media is also a critical issue for councillors, so we've worked with the Local Government Association to develop social media guidelines for councillors to help you manage your virtual presence to ensure that you don't breach the code of conduct or misconduct, and that you navigate what can be really difficult waters in terms of the unacceptable behaviours sometimes of members of the community when they're engaged on social media, and that you don't become a part of that either. And registers of interest, there are also resources on our website to assist you with registers of interest. So these are some of the products that we have put out. Most recently, an advice on the use of messaging applications, which we've put out in collaboration with the Queensland State Archives. We'd encourage you to follow the OIA on tweets, and you'll receive a lot of the stuff that we push out in real time. And finally, I want to talk about what you can proactively do now to ensure that there are not misconduct issues, and certainly that you don't ever go anywhere near the Crime and Corruption Commission, no offence. The first thing is that I'd really encourage you to take this time now to understand your conflicts of interest. If you have recently received donations and they're from a person, do you know what companies are associated with that person? If you've received a donation from a company, do you know what individuals are associated with that company? Is it practical for councillors to have to do that every time they get a meeting agenda? No, I don't think it is. But it is practical and proactive to do that now at the commencement of your term, and it's probably appropriate to do that probably 18 months in as well. So if you have a business, I consider now how you're going to identify any overlap between your business and council. If you have a number of people who are very close to you or relatives who do business with council, consider now how is the best way to deal with that. So I'd encourage you to take some time now to think about that, because I've noticed that when matters go before the Councillor Conduct Tribunal, one of the first things that they want to know is what methodology have councillors put in place to be able to identify and check their conflicts of interest. Make sure that your registers of interest are locked and loaded, because we're now at a time when those registers of interest are due. if you overlook something, update it as soon as possible, and remember that as your interests change, you have 30 days in which to update your registers of interest. Have that code of conduct, the local government principles, and section 12 or 14 if you're in the Brisbane City Council nearby to you, and use it as your reference point where you have to make tough decisions. Review your social media guide to inform your social media presence and management. And I'd really encourage you to follow the OIA and the CCC on Twitter, and probably yours too, Nikola, for the Integrity Commission's Twitter, to get regular updates about matters that are pushed out, which are there to try and assist you to build capacity. So that brings us to the end of my presentation from the Office of the Independent Assessor. Whilst our staff are all relatively new, in addition to selecting staff because they're really good at what they do, I really wanted to make sure we selected staff who were really easy to engage with and decent people. So if you have any questions and if you have any concerns at any time, then I'd really encourage you to get on the phone to us and to contact us, and we spend many hours talking things through with councillors and with complainants, and we'd encourage you to do that.
Thanks, Kath. Some very useful and interesting information about the roles and functions of your office. I'm sure, particularly for our new councillors out there, will have found that very, very useful for them in their new role.